what's going on with the cause of his death and what's the implication right now, especially on the stance of President Trump on the protest around the US. Right now we have Kun Nat Bunnak joining us for this story. So what's the latest revelation about autopsy of George Floyd?
So the autopsy results have confirmed the death of George Floyd. So they all agree that it was a homicide, but the cause seemed to be different. One says one thing and the other says completely different. So we'll begin with the independent autopsy, which is hired by the Floyd family. They actually said that he died due to lack of oxygen when his neck and back were compressed by the police officers. The specific term here is called asphyxiation from sustained pressure, and the pressure has been cut off. The pressure has cut off the blood flow to his brain as well. But in contrast, the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office said that the cause of death is due to heart failure. So we can see that there's some sort of conflicting causes here. And they also said that, well, the Hennepin County said heart disease was an issue, which is something that the independent examiner did not find that.
So what is the indication as to which of the theories, which of the conclusion could be sort of used in the prosecution then?
It's hard to say here because based on the whole situation, remember the crime that occurred last week, we can all say it came from the police officers who killed George Floyd. But one side of it, they think it's because of his previous health conditions that might have also contributed to his death as well.
But what's the reaction from President Trump so far? Does it help in calming down the situation?
Not at all, because as the protests continue to erupt across the United States, President Trump has threatened to send in troops to end the protests. For this, the president demanded the mayors and governors to establish an overwhelming law enforcement to end the violent protests. If not, he would deploy the army and quickly solve the problem for them. And the president also said that all Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd, but he also said that his memory must not be drowned out by an angry mob.
And he also planned to use military force because he has discussed with governor and asked them to use military force.
Yeah, because the president felt that the mayors and the governors were not doing enough to curb the whole situation here. So President Trump believes that sending in the troops will help control the situation even better.
In fact, he used the word weak. He called the governors, he described the way these governors handled the situation as being weak. So he urged them to arrest the rioters and track them and put them in jail for 10 years. And that's what he said. And then you will see the end of this. So he was seen as being very, very provocative and did not help in calming down the situation at all.
And it seems like things are going to get worse because of the way he said about the protests and the way the mayors and the governors should deal with the situation, and saying that deploying the military would help, but maybe it might cause more violence because we can see that the previous protests that are going on, we see a lot of violence between the protesters as well as the police, or even what you're seeing right here on the screen at the moment. The protests are still very emotional and angry, and this is enough to say that the justice is not there for George Floyd.
We understand that the protests and riots have spread to more than 40 cities now, right?
Actually, more than 75 cities with ongoing protests, but 40 cities have already been imposed with their curfews, and some of them have extended their curfews because the protests are still very violent. For example, in New York City has already imposed a citywide lockdown from 11 p.m. on Monday until 5 a.m. on Tuesday.
see.
Washington, D.C. also extended its curfew. Even LA also went with a 12-hour overnight curfew from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Tuesday morning, which is the harshest curfew in this city of LA since the riots back in 1992. So we can see that they all handled the situation by imposing curfews here.
Yeah, this is in the middle of New York City at Times Square.
Yeah.
It's must be quite very weird scene for New York City, and they have also imposed curfew. And what about the politician from Democrat Party? What's the reaction?
The reaction towards the death of George Floyd are pretty much the same. They're similar to each other. So Joe Biden, of course, he feels that the protesting such brutality is right and necessary, but burning down communities and destruction is not necessary at all. Even Barack Obama, who's the former president, also condemned the use of violence at nationwide protests, but at the same time, he also praised the actions of the protests that are seeking change in the justice system.
Yes. I think we need to draw a line between the protesters who have been demonstrating peacefully and those who take the opportunity to riot and to resort to looting. Even members of the families of George Floyd have come out to say that George Floyd certainly would not want you to come to this far. He means all the rioting or the looting. So it's quite clear.
Yeah, but the family actually felt touched by all these protests because they're all coming out to demand justice for George Floyd. But I think nobody expects all the protests to be this violent, especially in the US.
Yeah, the stand of each group has to be very careful as well, because President Trump called a group Antifa, like extreme left, who try to incite the situation and make things worse. So probably there are some group who try to intervene the situation.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Kun Nat.
Thank you.
No, and even though in Bangkok or in Thailand there's nothing happening that can be seen as being threatening, but the Thai police have stepped up the security at the U.S. embassies in Bangkok,
Yes.
just to be on the safe side.
Yeah.